Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Jacob and Nelson podcast. Today we have a really interesting, polarizing, sensitive topic or topics that we want to address. White fragility slash privilege and racism in America. Help me welcome to the show, Jacob. How you doing, Jacob?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm fantastic. So we had a conversation last week, and there were a couple of things you wanted to address based on our conversation. So the floor is all yours, my friend.
Yeah. So we had a really engaging conversation, I thought, last week. It was the first one that we had done live.
Yeah.
So it was completely uncharted territory for me. I don't know if you had done something similar to that in the past. I'm assuming you have. But it was completely different. And so, even as new as podcasting is for the two of us on this platform, taking it to that next level of being live was even more new and uncharted territories for me. But it was good, right? I mean, there was a lot of interactive comments. We touched on a lot of, um, really sensitive points, I think. And, you and I approached those points from two very, very different perspectives. And we did it civilly. We did it in a manner where we weren't screaming at each other or walking away from the conversation hating one another. And that was kind of what in our earliest conversations about even talking about doing something like this. That was the goal, right? Like we didn't want these conversations framed as debates, right? Nelson versus Jacob, you versus me, us versus them, right? My opinion versus your opinion. We really just wanted to say, here's how I view a particular topic, and here's why I view it that way, and kind of have a back and forth and open to the dialogue. But so forgive me for going off on a little tangent there with that. But
It's all right.
there was one particular point we were talking about the Breonna Taylor case last week, and we agreed before even going into this podcast that we didn't want to get into the grand jury decision that just recently came out. That was not something that we're going to get into this week. Maybe we get into it in future podcasts, but that's not the point of this conversation. But one of the commenters, challenged me on the claim that I had made, where the police had. It was in Louisville, Kentucky. They had a no-knock warrant that they were serving at Breonna Taylor's address. And one of the commenters made a claim that basically said that the police were at the wrong address, right? So the insinuation or the inference there was they didn't have just cause to be at Breonna Taylor's apartment in the first place. And
Mhm.
so, again, with the conversation being live, I didn't want to say anything that I would have later regretted or needed to go back on. And so I specifically said, let me go and research that. If I'm wrong on something, I'll address it. If I'm not wrong, then let's kind of
I
deal
think
with it, move on.
that's
And
mature.
right. So, well, thank you. And so I did go in and do the research on it. And so the only source that I was able to find that sustained that claim was the attorney for the family. His name is Ben Crump, and he sent it out via a tweet and a couple of other Facebook posts that said they had the wrong address and their real suspect was already in custody or something to that effect. And so there was one claim that clears this up on, it was a USA Today article that was written in June that said the police were investigating Taylor's apartment. They did have a no-knock warrant to enter her specific address. The warrant
Mhm.
for Taylor's address was approved due to Taylor's prior association with a suspect in a drug case. And so what was happening was there was a person of interest in the ongoing case that was taking place. That person was using Breonna Taylor's address to get mail. They were able to
Mhm.
confirm that through a U.S. postal inspector. And then a journal called Courier Journal did like a very thorough fact checked of all of the allegations that were made and claims that were made. And they again specifically came out and said that Ben Crump was the attorney for involved with the case. He was the one that wrote on Twitter, and the warrant for Taylor's apartment. I'm sorry, the warrant was specifically for Breonna Taylor's apartment.
Okay.
Um,
Because the suspect in the was resided in that apartment,
he didn't reside in that apartment,
or he was.
but he had affiliations, and he had been using her address for packages, and so that's why the U.S. Postal Inspector confirmed, yes, this particular person who was a person of interest in the case was using this address to receive packages. And so it appeared as if it was his address. And so that was the justifiable probable cause as to why her name was on there. And so on the search warrant, Courier Journal has access to them. The search warrant for Taylor's home includes her street address, her apartment number, photos for her apartment door, her name, date of birth, and social security number. And again, the reason was there were main targets in the investigation was Jamarcus Glover and Adrian Walker. And so I just wanted to clear that up to say, again, I never once in that conversation minimized the severity of the tragedy that took place. My only point that I was trying to make was that the police, that was not a demonstration of an overreach of power or police brutality or a white supremacist, racist police system inflicting another death of an African-American person without any cause. And so that was the only position that I held on that. And again, it turns out that the police did have the warrant for her address and they had cause to be there. And again, since this has all come out, no-knock warrants in Louisville, Kentucky have now been banned.
Yeah,
right. And so, right. So if we want to debate, how necessary no-knock warrants are, or should they be allowed, that's a conversation to have. But again, specifically making the claim that they were at the wrong address is a false claim. And so I just wanted to make sure that was out there.
That is definitely a conversation we need to have. The no-knock warrant for an address of she wasn't a person of interest. The person of interest was affiliated with that address. So a no-knock warrant, I can see that being, and we can get into this in another day. But thanks for your explanation. For anyone watching this right now, Jacob and I are just having a conversation about some really, really difficult, sensitive topics that have been known to polarize and divide. But our goal today is not to polarize and divide. Our goal is to just create a platform for healthy conversation. You're more than welcome to join this conversation through your comments, wherever you're watching right now, whether it's on Facebook or on YouTube. Your comments are very welcome. So please let's keep our comments civil. Let's challenge each other's points of views, but let's not insult each other in the process of trying to get a healthy conversation going. So with that said, Michael said, Jacob, speak those facts, my man. See, it's not all.
Fine, there it
is. So Michael is a good friend of mine, and I want to echo something you said earlier, Jacob, about your point was not to demean another human being's life. And, the fact that a lady who was not involved she was exonerated in terms of her involvement, correct me if I'm wrong,
yeah, that might be an apocryphal statement as well. We're not sure yet. Actually, more details have actually come out that have indicated that she was possibly involved in the money aspect of the drug operation that was going on.
It's not certain. Yeah.
Right. I'm not making that claim.
Okay. Just like the claims are made for and against, it's not certain yet. So if we're going to come with the premise that, let's stick with the facts. The facts show that as of right now, as of today, at least from what I've heard, that she was not affiliated with that particular illegal activity or those illegal activities.
But
other than hosting the person of interest.
Correct. But
okay.
In addition to that, though, the facts of the case are the police were justified at being at that house.
Well, that's true. What I also heard was, correct me if I'm wrong, the main policeman that was in question, that I think was charged, without going into too much details about what the grand jury decided today, was there was what's it called, wanton,
wanton endangerment.
Wanton endangerment, where he shot into through the curtain of the window without identifying who was there. So basically, it was abuse of power.
So again, here we go. We said we weren't going
I
to
know.
go here. But
Okay. Okay.
no. It's fine. I can be succinct. I think, although I people always tell me that I'm not succinct. So the bottom line behind it was so yes, the police officer who was ultimately charged in the grand jury indictment, he was charged for wanton endangerment for firing rounds into adjacent apartments or adjacent houses in that area. And so I am 99% certain it came back as a fact that it was none of his bullets were the ones that were involved that fired at Breonna Taylor. And so basically the whole point is if police officers are on the scene of an incident that's taking place and there is just cause for a police involved shooting to take place, all of those police officers have to have that same just cause. So you and I could be on the same scene. I could interpret something as a deadly force situation has to take place right now, and so I use deadly force. My using the deadly force is not justifiable for you to then jump in and start firing your weapon as well. You would have to have interpreted and witnessed that deadly force. And so what went down was that particular officer, to my understanding, was blindly firing, probably based on the firing that was taking place from the other two officers at Kenneth Walker, who was Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, who fired first at the officers as they were trying to execute that warrant. And so, again, that particular officer probably didn't have the vantage point, didn't have the visibility that he should have. And so the charges that were brought against him were specifically for the wanton endangerment of adjacent buildings and houses, not Breonna Taylor's.
I see. Okay. I like the way you break it down and describe it. So, once again, if anyone's watching this, please keep your comments civil. We're trying to spark healthy conversation here, not curse at each other and be more polarized. Well, I think this kind of ties into the whole social justice, propaganda. For we had talked about the Black Lives Matter movement. We had talked about um, how it's led to this very, very sensitive period we're in right now, where you just cannot bring up these topics without being labeled as one or the other. So I think I could comfortably talk about this without ever being labeled a racist. Um, but you could, and you could talk about it, but you have more of a risk or more of a possibility or probability of being labeled a racist because of this term, which I want you to break down for us, which is white fragility or white privilege. I don't know if it's synonymous, but primarily white fragility. So there is a book out there about that, and you wanted to dispel some of the points of the book. So go ahead.
Yeah, so I would say that the two terms, white fragility and white privilege, are not synonymous with one
Okay.
another. And so when, the basic point behind there is a central thematic message in White Fragility. So White Fragility is a book that was written by Robin DiAngelo. She is a corporate consultant who basically is hired, and she makes a fantastic living doing what she does, going to these corporations and trying to dispel racism and even promote anti-racism. And so she wrote this book back in 2018. It
Mhm.
didn't really gain a whole lot of traction until early 2020.
With everything going on around us.
When everything started to transpire around us. And so, the central thematic message that's going on in this book right now is that there's no such thing as a universal human experience, and you're not defined by individual personalities or moral choices. You're simply defined by your racial category, and
Really,
everything is reducible to your race.
really,
And
that's where she's coming from. That everything is can be reduced to race. Everything can be
everything
explained by race.
everything can be explained by race. Every
Hmm.
differential or every disparity that can be viewed, if there's a racial disparity, then it is a racist institution essentially. And so it's so yes, that's the central theme of the book. And essentially it's if you are white, you are a racist, and it is your duty to live in a state of constant self-flagellation in the hopes that you expiate your inherent, innate, and inexorable racism, right? So whiteness is synonymous with racist, is sort of the synopsis of that book. And that is a toxic message to promote.
I haven't read the book, but I listened to one of her speeches. Was it Jimmy Fallon? She was on or somewhere, but she had talked about white fragility, and the way she
I think
defined
it
it
was.
was okay. The way she defined it was strong positional defensiveness, withdrawal, and resistance when a white man or woman's racial point of view is challenged. That's the premise I got from her definition of white fragility. But you're saying in her book she basically dumbs everything down about the human experience and cultural experience to race.
Yeah, I mean, so here's a quote from her book, right?
Okay.
Quote, anti-blackness is foundational to our very identities. And she's a white woman, so she's speaking of this as a white woman. Anti-blackness is foundational to our very identities. Whiteness has always been predicated on blackness.
Mm-hmm.
Quote, a positive white identity is an impossible goal, end quote. Another quote is, we should all strive to be less white, end quote.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so, you know, if she's making the correlation that whiteness is equivalent to racist, well, then yes, you should strive to be less white. But that presupposition that whiteness is synonymous with racist is a terrible presupposition starting point.
Without knowing what the context of that statement, you've read the book, so you can speak more to that.
Well, so no,
Without
I
knowing,
should.
okay,
No, I'll clarify.
okay.
I have read excerpts and bits and pieces, and I have read extensive reviews and articles that pertain to the book that have, I mean, several quotations, unpacked those quotations. So I have not read the book cover to cover, but I have spent hours reading on both sides, both for and against the book, and harsh criticisms of this book. And so I can comfortably and confidently speak about what the book's contents are based on the reviews and the quotations that I have read from it. Yes.
Okay. So, question for you.
And if that's not good enough for people listening, then I will listen. I will read the book, and we can have another conversation about it.
No, I want to unpack a couple of things. So, I will have to read her book or read excerpts of her book to really get the gist of it. But I will just take your word for it right now. But my question is this, and this is a personal experience I've had in this country, living here for 24 years, that the topic of race is, at least what I feel viscerally when I talk to a lot of white people, is one that seems very uncomfortable. You being a white man, I'm not saying you have to speak for all white people. Just
And
like
I
can't
wouldn't.
speak for,
I would
yeah,
never. I would never dare to speak for all white people.
yeah. I'm not asking you to. I'm speaking from my point of view, so I want you to speak from yours. So, am I right to assume that there is hesitation, there is a fear, there is a resistance to conversing about topics that are racially charged?
I would say yes, there probably is,
And why?
and because of the fear that any microscopic part of a sentence that you would possibly say could be taken out of context.
Mm.
And again, it's just, are you familiar with the term Kafka traps? Have you heard of
Kafka traps?
Kafka traps? Kafka traps.
No.
Are you familiar with what that is? No. So
I
that's
can only imagine. It's a. Go ahead. I can imagine what it is, but go ahead.
Well, so it's a logical fallacy type of trap that the term was coined in circa 2010, and it was in reference to a story by an author. His name was Franz Kafka, Kafka, and I believe he was from Prague, and he had written a story called The Trial. And so the theme of the story was about a man who was accused of crimes that were never specified. And so a Kafka trap is, I'm going to accuse you of being racist. And that's a terrible epithet to be accused of, right? So Nelson, you're a racist. And you have two options at that point. Basically, you can say, yeah, I am. and you confirm my notion that I think that you're a racist, and then everybody knows that Nelson is a racist, and problem solved, and we can move on from that. Or you can deny the fact that you're a racist, and your very denial of being a racist is confirmation to me that, well, that's exactly what a racist would say.
It's a lose-lose argument.
It's a lose-lose argument, and it's an unfalsifiable argument, right? And so that's what this book is in a nutshell. It's essentially, it's a Kafka trap. If you're white, you're racist. If you say you're not racist, then that just buttresses my point that you must be racist, because a racist would say that they're not racist, right? And so I think the trepidation in having conversations like you and I are having, and again, I've said this now multiple times, even on our podcast, that I have a healthy trepidation with having these conversations, especially now that we're live streaming them. But, I'm willing to do it because I don't think that I've said anything incriminating. I don't think I've said anything that's unfactual. I'm certain I haven't said anything that is racist. And so, but I think there is this fear of that if you say anything that sounds like it's not vehemently opposed to racist, well, then you immediately fall to the other end of the spectrum, and then you must be a racist. And I think that's probably where the fear comes from.
From my perspective, and I appreciate your point of view, and actually I find a lot of validity and coherence in your point of view. From my perspective, I see it's almost like this. Okay, think I'm a younger brother. My older brother was a year and a half, 2 years older than me. And when my parents were not around, he would beat me up and beat me up and beat me up. I'm not saying that he wasn't a mean older brother. Brothers fight. You know how it is. So we would fight, and he would, go hard on me. And then, but I couldn't do anything about it because I was weaker. I was younger then, and I couldn't do anything about it. He was stronger than I was. But then when the parents came around, I did everything in my power to make sure they understood that this injustice was done to me. And sometimes they would listen, sometimes they would not. And if they did not listen, I felt like some kind of wrong was done to me. And, I had to be the loudest voice. I had to really get all the evidence so that way I can prove that a wrong was done to me. So the way I see it from my perspective is there is a real fear from a white person's perspective to engage in any conversation racially charged for fear of being labeled that. And like you said, it's a Kafka trap. However, there is also on the flip side this need to be heard and understood by the persons that look and sound like our oppressors historically, systematically, and presently. Now, I'm not saying that everyone is, a racist, but I'm saying if historically and systematically over time you look like my oppressor and you've never once acknowledged that the reason why I'm oppressed is because of, A, what happened in the past, what is happening sometimes even now, then we're just two people too afraid to engage in this space that we need to be engaged in to have a healthy discussion about, so we can move forward and we can heal at the same time. So I feel there's a fear on the white person's side to do that. There's also an anger from the black person's side that, hey, no one is listening, right? So what if no one's listening? I might as well come after you. Now you're gonna listen to me. I don't agree with it. I don't think that's the right way to go about it. But I think that's the reality of the world we find ourselves in.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have said on a couple of occasions that you don't agree with the outbursts that are going on.
Yes.
So the alternative. Go ahead.
I don't agree with the outbursts. I believe meeting. It's like any kind of conversation. If we spend all the time here, like right now, I interrupted you, right? And you were kind enough to give me the platform to explain my point. And then I will explain my point and I'll feel like I was heard. And I'll give you that same courtesy to do that. But if I was the one that felt like I was being, some kind of wrong was done to me, and you're not giving me the platform historically to speak, eventually I'm just going to start speaking over you and pushing down on you. So like we talked about, I think 2 podcasts ago, riots is the language of the oppressed. You know, not like when you win a hockey game and your team wins and you go rioting.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's the case, but I'm saying rioting is the language of the oppressed. And I think what we need, what the black people need to do, what the white people need to do, and everyone in between, brown and vanilla, whatever, we just need to understand that there has been historical hurt, there has been systematic hurt that has gone on in this country that to an extent might have been the backbone in this country. We cannot negate that. We should be able to engage in those conversations. And when we do engage, not shame each other because of we're trying to process our thoughts out loud.
And I don't think anybody is negating the historical problems, right? I mean, nobody who makes enough sense is negating the historical problems that have taken place in America. But I also don't think that it's a fair counter argument to say, well, then the entire country and the entire system that we live in absolutely is terrible, and we've got to burn the whole thing to the ground
I didn't
and
say that.
basically start fresh. No, no, no. I'm not saying that you have
Okay,
said that.
okay,
I'm
okay.
just saying, like, that's also not a game theoretically viable starting point to move from, right? There has been progress. We have to get to a point in 2020 where we all acknowledge that from the 1850s to the Emancipation Proclamation in the 1860s through Jim Crow that took place in the 1960s to 2020, there's been improvement, right?
I agree.
And so, so it's not a fair argument to say, yeah, it's a fair argument to say, yes, the history of America is riddled with flaws that
Agree.
we have looked at, we have dealt with case by case. Some of them have taken years and years and decades to get to a point where we're a lot better. But this idea that, we're still stuck in the 1850s with the white man's boot on the black man's neck is not a fair place to
So
start.
can I say this? I think it's a fair place to be in. Not it's not a fair place to there are symptoms of protest that I don't agree with. I don't agree with shaming the other person. I don't agree with rioting. But even the civil rights movement in itself was at a certain point looked upon as a disturbance of peace. Was at a certain point looked upon as, hey, things are actually getting better, right? But it's easier to say from a position of strength that, look, things are getting better and we should just chill and converse. But very, very immediately and very urgently, there's someone out there that is experiencing the remnant and of oppression. And it could be the prison system, it could be the housing system, it could be the educational system. They're experiencing it right now. So to tell that person that don't speak up in a violent and passionate way and look at history and how we're better is to that person, I'm not saying me or you, but to that person is minimizing what they are going through right now.
Right. And for every single anecdotal instance, for any type of topic that you're going to look at, whatever the case may be,
Mm-hmm.
women used to be incredibly oppressed in this country.
Sure. Still are.
There's still remnants of that in this country, but we have come a long, long way with women. So yes, there are still anecdotes. There are still anecdotal evidence exists that women have felt that their voice haven't been heard, but the overwhelming majority of women's rights, right? If a rising tide lifts all ships, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak, right? Where we were back in the early 1900s compared to where we are now in 2020 is exponentially better than
Mm-hmm.
what we came from. And so I think, though, again, that acknowledgement has to take place, and the acknowledgement that it's we have to have the conversations that we're having. We can't start off. We can't. Our jumping off point can't be, well, I'm white, and so it's not fun for me to talk about race because I'm afraid I'm going to be labeled that I'm a racist. And
Yeah.
you're black, and historically I've been oppressed, and historically my voice hasn't been heard. So my response is I'm going to burn the whole system to the ground. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, there's a massive chasm in between that of common ground, I think, that can be met with. But, and this goes back to, we talked about this in our conversation on politics, where everything's polarizing. And that book that I referenced in that podcast, Hate Inc. by Matt Taibbi, where it was like the 10 rules of hate we talked
Oh, yeah, I
about. And
remember
it was
that.
like the first rule of the 10 rules of hate is that there are only two sides to a conversation, and that those two sides are in constant contrast and conflict with each other. And so that's what's being posed right now. It's like you have to either choose to be racist or anti-racist. There's no in
Mm-hmm.
between. You can't just say, "Well, I'm not a racist," because that's not good enough. And
Yeah.
but you should be able to do that. What does anti-racist even mean? That's a term that Ibram X. Kendi coined for
Yeah.
his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I don't know.
I,
It
I,
just
I do think the easy and cowardly perspective that is being shipped around in media is not helping. Is not helping our progress. I do think the extreme polarization, like it baffles my mind when I watch whether it's CNN and Fox or whatever, and I see the moderator and I see the panel, and the panel could not be more opposed in their points of views. And usually, you never find anyone somewhere in the middle to kind of balance the arguments out. It's always usually the polarized, and this is fed to us on a daily basis, and people eat these things up. And I feel like the media hasn't done us a good service over the years. And I had another question I'll ask later on, and that question you can address it now or address it later on, but where do we go to get the truth with a healthy perspective? Because it's one thing to tell the truth, but it's a whole other thing to tell the truth with a healthy perspective. So that way it doesn't take away from the worth of a person or group of persons. So where do we go to? Because we are the average American, the average individual in the Western world is inundated with stimuli from the media every day. And if you're lucky, you get to live in your own little echo chamber, and you everything in that echo chamber just confirms your beliefs. So you have I guess a confirmation bias. Yeah, if you're really unlucky, you're stuck in an echo chamber of religion and politics that is deeply rooted in your family and your community, and you cannot escape that to allow your mind think and see options and different things. So where does one go in the Western world to get the truth first with a healthy perspective?
like as far as the media is concerned, or as
As
far
far as
as
knowledge that needs to be gained, because for example, if you tell me this is the issue we have, there's an issue of police brutality, for example. Okay, there's going to be proponents and opponents for that point of view. Okay, if you go to one next station, they are heavily one-sided. The other station heavily one-sided. So if you find yourself stuck in these places, all you get is just this polarizing points of views. I feel like there should be a space where we can all just go. Hopefully, the Jacob and Nelson podcast, where there should be a space where we can all go to have to get the truth with a healthy perspective. I don't know if that space exists. That's the problem.
Yeah, well, I don't know if there's one particular platform that exists that is completely neutral where you can just go somewhere and get the facts, right? And I would say start off by completely eradicating the viewership of Fox News, MSNBC, and CNN, right? Because
Good luck.
all three of those, no, but I'm saying as a viewer, like so
Okay.
you asked as an individual,
Okay.
right? Don't watch any of those news networks, right?
I
I
agree.
would I would say that they're all three terrible. All of them are funded by multi-billionaires who have a narrative that they want to push. They sort of gerrymander or sort of jigger whatever facts it is that they want to portray to fit whatever narrative it is that they're trying to get at. And so the bottom line is it takes work. Like it takes a lot of work at the end of the day to parse all of the nonsense and say, okay, well, wait a minute now. I just watched Fox News for 5 minutes and I just watched MSNBC for 5 minutes, and the two of them could not have been more antithetical to one another in terms of what they were saying, right? So that then says, okay, well, now I've got to dig a layer deeper on both claims. I've got to research both. I've got to figure out where I'm going from there. And so I would say the average American person, frankly, doesn't want to. And we talked about this in our politics podcast, where it's like those news networks are not in the business of feeding real news and factual, unbiased, nonpartisan news. They know what their audience is, and they're going there to give the audience what they want, because that's the way that those platforms are designed. And so it just simply takes a lot of work. You have to go to independent journalists. You have to go to underground independent journalists who are not funded by these billionaires who, are basically told to how to spin a story, right? You have to just be able to get the facts. And again, there's the problem with, how much information there is that's available out there today is for every story that you get your hands on, you're probably going to find a couple of things that counter that, right? And so, yeah, you have to dig, but at the end of the day, you have to make up your mind for yourself and say, okay, here's I've done my research as far as I can take it on a topic that I'm passionate about, and here's the conclusion that I've ultimately drawn based on the totality of the readings. And you have to be willing to change your position on topics in a fluid manner when people say, okay, I get the fact that you've read 10 books, articles, or journals on a particular topic of varying degrees of where they're coming from, left or right, or what their perspectives are. But here's the 11th. And the 11th sort of succinctly and completely summarizes all of that. And it sort of juxtaposes the points, and they kind of go back and forth, and it arrives at a different narrative. And so you have to have that flexibility on being able to change your mind and say, wait a minute, I have that open mind.
Ultimately, if someone does what you say to do, which I believe I try to do, and I'm sure you do, based on conversing with you, with the books you read and the perspectives you have. If someone does that, ultimately, if everyone did that in this country equally as intentionally as possible, you're still going to arrive with people with different points of views. And this is why I wanted to land again. Like, even when we do arrive at different points of views, there is an element of the human worth that is lost when you hear people conversing about the issues that affect everyone. There's an element of the human worth that I believe is lost. And you hear people sometimes talk about our fellow human beings as though they're just numbers, as though they're just a construct, as though it's just them versus us. And you don't feel the kindness with their perspectives. It's one thing for me to disagree with your point of view, but it's a whole other thing for me to use my perspective about your point of view as a way to ridicule you, shame you, oppress you, think of you as less than. I think that's the problem. And like I've told you many times, it's modeled for us from the top down. Like you see in the RNC and the DNC debates, it's designed specifically to find a person's point of view, attack that person's point of view, and even ridicule that person's point of view. And if you can do that, they give you the thumbs up. You won. But if you cannot do that, he's a terrible debater. But it's been modeled for us from the top down to the point now where people that I converse with on my level, it becomes a shouting match. It becomes, well, because you have that perspective, then that makes you okay. I know I'm rambling a little bit, but let me just say this. I've met people I'm a musician. I've traveled this country, and I've met people that my initial impression of them was something, right? It was something. But just because of what I've chosen, and then the point here is chose, what I've chosen to be my perspective, which is that every human being has equal worth, that I cannot take away from them, that God has given them. So because I've chosen that perspective, it cannot allow me converse with a human being that sees the world totally different from me and leave that person with any and try to take away that word from them. But all I see in the conversations around us, watch on social media right now. If I were to go to the comment section right now, I hope not, but you see how it's designed to say your point of view is wrong, and here's why it's wrong, and here's why you're a terrible person. And I think, to your point earlier, why some white people don't want to engage in conversations that are racially charged is because they feel like if I engage in this space, I will be my worth as a human being will be taken away from me. And the person is bringing up those conversations will feel like if they don't engage in this space with me, they've already taken my worth as a human being. So it's like there's no win. That's how I see it from my perspective.
Right, which is why it's important to start off those. It's important to just completely. Um, it's important to completely disabuse yourself of that notion from the starting point, where it's just, I know going into this that if my opinion is different from this person's opinion, then it's going to end in hate. It's going to end in vituperative comments. It's going to end in just an absolute screaming match, right? And so you and I, we had that conversation, and I thought that we kind of agreed on it for the most part, that that's not a good starting point. And so I guess, where I'm going back to with this is that with this book, the message that this book is promoting and how deeply everybody on the extreme liberal left is just eating this book to pieces and just spewing it out of their mouth as like it's just the gospel. It's a dangerous narrative that anybody on, particularly on the left, because again, I think the left is at more to blame for promulgating books like this, should come out and speak out against it and say, you know what, whiteness is not synonymous with racist. Period. That's not a good starting point. Again, I am not dismissing the historical oppression that has taken place. In 2020, whiteness is not synonymous with racist. That is a fallacy. That is an absolutely wrong place to start.
What is whiteness?
Well, okay. I mean, my interpretation of whiteness is you're white.
Yeah. So, but
I mean,
what is the ness part to it? What is the ness?
I don't know that there has to be anything else to it than that. I mean, I truly think that this woman, again, if read enough of the comments about her book, I mean, she, again, her starting point with this book is that if you're white, you're a racist, and you have to self-flagellate that and punish yourself because of that in the hopes that you can expiate your racism. And the point of her book too is that the racism that exists within you inherently in your whiteness can never be fully eradicated, right? So it's with you forever. You're white, therefore you're racist, right?
Yeah,
and so that is a message that absolutely should be. Now, are there instances of racism from white people against black people? 100%. There are instances of racism for blacks against whites, right? Racism exists, but they are instances that take place, and they should be viewed individually. You can't just immediately jump way off the boat and say that whiteness is synonymous with racist. That to me that's a narrative that should absolutely be completely dispelled.
I think that's a narrative that should be dispelled, but I think it should be on the table. The reason being, once you judge a man by the content of his character, and that character shows a character flaw, if that flaw is that person is just a liar, that person's a liar. If that person is a thief, that person's a thief. If that person's a racist, that person's a racist. I don't think I hear what you're saying.
So can you back up for 1 second? So did you say that whiteness is synonymous with racist?
Never said that.
No. I'm asking. I was just trying to frame it as a question. Okay. Did you say it should be on the table?
No, I said the character of a person should be on the table.
Okay, I misunderstood.
Yeah. So I don't agree with the premise. Whiteness is synonymous with racism. I don't agree with that. I agree with the idea that if someone's character flaw is they are racist, that should come to play in the conversation and the argument. For example, if if there's a cop, this is hypothetical, by the way. If there's a cop who has been known to be part of the KKK and has a history of pulling over black people and shooting black people, that should be brought up to the as evidence to be argued and debated upon as to whether or not this person's character flaw contributed towards their behavior. Now that's just a little sliver of someone's potential character. Going back to what Martin Luther King said, I would hope that we would live in a world where people are judged by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin. And that premise, whiteness is synonymous with racism, is doing exactly what he doesn't want to have happen. I agree
Well,
with that.
I'm glad you brought up that quote because she actually particularly uses that quote in the
Oh
book.
God,
And so
let's see. Let me hear.
so she says, quote, one line of King's speech in particular, that one day he might be judged by the content of his character, not the color of his skin, was seized upon by the white public because the words were seen to provide a simple and immediate solution to racial tensions. Pretend that we don't see race, and racism will end. Color blindness is now promoted as the remedy for racism, with white people insisting that they didn't see race, or if they did, that it had no meaning to them. That is a terrible,
Twists.
terrible interpretation of Martin Luther King's. He was not, by any sense of the imagination, invoking the message that people should be colorblind. You're gonna see people's color,
I
right?
definitely
I can't help by consequence and by dint of being a human being with functioning eyes, I can see that you're a black human being.
Am I?
But that does not mean that everything that I learn about you relates back to the fact that, well, that because Nelson's black. That's got to be the reason. And so what this woman does there, I mean, she takes that line and basically just says that, well, white people can say, well, we're colorblind now, we don't see the racial tensions, and it's just that's not true. It's an absolute false statement. It's a complete misinterpretation of MLK's speech. Because again, his goal was not to eradicate the world from seeing color. That was never his mission. It was just to say, don't judge me on the fact that I'm black, right? That don't let that be my defining quality.
That minimize my humanity to my melanin, my skin color.
Right, because do you want to know how much choice he had, or I have, in being white? We had 0% choice in the color that we were born into, the race that we were born into, right? You and I are who we are because our parents had sex, right? Let's just say it. And you didn't have
obvious.
You didn't have a choice in the matter to the circumstances that you were born into, or the skin that you were born into.
Technically, I had a choice. I had a choice if I was born or not because I was the strongest swimmer. I can't tell you anything else.
Fair enough. You were the best. You and I, a couple 100 million, right? We made it. Otherwise, it might be my brother talking to your brother right now.
I know. I'm gonna be shouting at each other.
And who knows how civil the conversation would have been. You and I were the most civil of the ones that made it through. So,
just the strongest.
Just the strongest, right? But so to reduce somebody's identity and everything else that comes with them, because like I said from the beginning, being labeled a racist is a terrible, terrible, almost you almost are unable to shed that epithet from you. Once you have that thrown on you, it's like that's a life sentence, man. And so it's just a terrible word to throw at somebody, and specifically it's terrible because if all you're doing is synonymizing somebody's race with being racist, that's a horrible starting point. And this book is just, it's full of that type of message.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. If once again, because I haven't read it, but if that's how she twisted that premise, I don't agree with that. I would like to say something here with regards to because it's cool for us to kind of talk about all these talking points without and no one is tasking us. I don't think we're tasking ourselves with the burden of a solution to this problem because it's probably way above our pay grades. But hopefully conversing about it can spark ideas. But the one thing that I have, and you tell me what you think about this, my perspective. I think like I'm a man. There is such a thing called a male privilege. I'm stronger than most women out there in the world. I am probably faster than most women out there in the world. And with that power comes responsibility. It's a very cheesy thing to say, but with that power comes responsibility. So, which is why whenever the burden of responsibility, when my wife and I are sleeping in the house upstairs and we hear a noise downstairs, the burden of responsibility is on me to be in front of her, to go downstairs to figure out what that noise was. God forbid it was an intruder. They get to me first, she can escape. I have to bear that burden of responsibility. What do you think about this premise that I'm proposing? In as much as we are in a very toxic situation right now, which has gotten better, like you've stated, but we're in a very toxic situation right now where the conversations of race is so charged, emotionally charged. Who has the burden of responsibility to be let me think of a good word here, to be more open, to be more calm when the issues of race is being addressed? I don't know if that's a good
Who
way to even put it.
who has the burden of responsibility to be more calm when issues of race are being addressed? I would say both. I would say absolutely both
Is it
sides.
equally both?
Yeah, because I think if you look, we talked about this in the last podcast. If you look at that Black Lives Matter movement, if you are not 125% on the side of backing Black Lives Matter, if you say one factually counter thing to what that movement is doing and the violence that is spawning from that movement, if you say something against that movement, it's immediately returned with hate, and you're not for Black lives. And so,
Mm,
look, I would say that the burden of civility and the burden of open to conversations is on both sides, 100%. White, as you said before, if there is a reservation on the part of white people to have conversations about race for fear of being caught in a Kafka trap, then I would say that they have that fear because of instances that have taken place on the other side where they've been put
mm,
into a Kafka trap. And so um, there is growth that has to happen on both sides, and the division has to be taken down on both sides. Where the starting point has to simply be, let's have a conversation. No,
mhm.
historical put all the historical context aside. We're in 2020. Let's let's start from the ground up without burning the system to the ground.
Yeah, I agree with you with regards to responsibility. I agree with you with regards to the equal responsibility of civility in the conversations. I I disagree with you with regards to burden of responsibility with regards to the openness. Now, let me explain why. I'm not saying that if you were not as open that I personally would come at you, but I can see how if now this is an example that is very true for a lot of people, and I think this is the one thing we cannot gloss over: the immediacy of my situation as it affects me today, not in the future or in the past, as today. That is a relic of what happened in the past or the not too distant past. For example, um, George Floyd. I think he had a daughter. So I don't know how old she was, but that child is going to have an impression of law enforcement that is very immediate and very now, very present, a perception that is going to be very charged emotionally when conversing about anything that has to do with law and authority. So to say that that child should be as open as, say, you and I, that have not had a family member killed by the law and authority is to severely minimize the immediacy and the emotional impact on that child. So a lot of times I'm trying to describe to you that the passion and sometimes violence we see that is attached to a movement that is birthed out of oppression, that is that not a birth out of a movement that its initial mission statement is birthed out of the oppression that black people have suffered in this country. That violence you see, not excusable, but understandable. And if you and I can understand that, especially you, not saying, especially you, because you represent to those who have been oppressed the figure, the face of the oppressor. So if you were to come to the table, let's say, for example, you and I went to that table and we saw George Floyd's daughter right now, and you said, as a white man who might have been or might not have been in law enforcement, and say, hey, this is how I feel about your situation. I'm open to talking to you. And then you're met with that emotion. If you're not open to just kind of let that storm kind of pass, we cannot have conversation. Does that make sense? Or am I just rambling?
Yeah. No, I think you changed the rules of the game a little bit though by
So,
bringing up George Floyd's daughter. All right.
oh,
So we
sorry.
went from the generalization of black people and the generalization of white people to George Floyd's daughter, which is, you know, one of the most, if not the most, disgusting videos I've ever seen in my life. Right, like that video that took place with him was almost unwatchable. Right.
I agree.
So yes, the visceral effects of what happened to George Floyd's daughter, what her watching what happened to her father is, I'm going to be really careful here, is not the same thing as black people in general and white people in general. However, to your point, yeah, there is, and I think that speaks to the point that I made in our last podcast about neuroplasticity, right? There was a rewiring of her feelings and synapses in her brain that took place about an inherent now mistrust in police based on a real-time, can reach out and touch it situation that happened to her father that she is right in the middle of, right? And so that's that's what I meant. And I had spoken to a couple of people about that neuroplasticity analogy that I had made, and I did want to make some clarifying comments on that.
Please do.
So all I was simply saying essentially is this: if I tell you to touch a stove, an oven or a stove 7 times, and I've assured you for 7 times that stove is not hot. I haven't turned it on. The stove is not hot. I'm telling you it's not hot. Look, just touch it. It'll be fine. And all 7 times you've touched it, the stove is hot and it's burned your hand. And on the 8th time I tell you to touch that stove, I promise you it's not hot. I haven't turned the stove on. I can assure you it's not hot. Look, just touch it. It's not hot. There's going to be a dubious sort of feeling in your mind about the veracity of what I'm saying about the hotness of that stove, right? And there's going to be a dubious distinction in your mind about the veracity of what anybody ever has to tell you about stoves being hot.
Yeah.
That's neuroplasticity, right? So your mind has now changed. You've been told 7 times the stove is not hot. Your hand has been burned 7 times. And now you are going to rightfully have a healthy fear of touching stoves. When and if, especially, someone tells you, no, I'm telling you it's not hot. So does that make a little bit of sense in terms of the neuroplasticity analogy that I was trying to make in the last podcast with respect?
It did for me. I just wanted you to clarify in case anyone viewing it might have.
Right. So, yeah, I mean,
unclear.
again, so you used George Floyd's daughter as an example, but I mean, it can be something as simple as, you know, if my daughter saw me get murdered by someone with red hair, that might have a lasting impression on her where it's just like, oh no, there's somebody who has red hair and a red beard, and that could imprint on her mind for the rest of her life. It could. I'm not saying it would, but it's a possibility.
So let me piggyback on that. If your daughter had viewed someone, God forbid, I'm not going to use you. We have this thing in African culture never to use people immediate to us as an example. So let's say there's a gentleman out there, his daughter witnesses a redhead man kill him. And this daughter goes out to a community of people that look like her, and they've all witnessed people with red hair kill their fathers, mothers, sisters, and brothers. and then this community bands together, and they have historical documents to suggest people with red hair kill people that look like us. The neuroplasticity kicks in, where there's a fear, there's a distrust for anyone with red hair that wanders into that neighborhood or that community, right? I'm going to stop there for any
Did
rebuttals.
Yeah. So I'm assuming though that the point that you're trying to make is that black people being killed by police, right? Is that the point where is that where you're going with this? Is that the analogous? Is that the analogy that you're trying to make?
I'm trying to expand on that, not just the police. I'm just talking about racism and the violence that has been meted out because of racism and the oppression from racism, and how sometimes it comes to a boiling point where the top of the pot comes over and it's like it's spilling over now. Everyone's going to catch it right now because this thing has not been, it has been addressed, yeah, but it only takes a little spark for it to just bubble over again. So
So it only takes a little spark for it to bubble over again. But again, this is going to go back to, and I'm gonna plant my feet pretty firmly in this position.
mhm,
The spark has to be a real spark, and as was pointed out in the instance of Michael Brown and the instance of Breonna Taylor, I don't think that those were legitimate sparks. I think that
yours,
those I think that those were tragedies, but I
I
don't think that
agree.
those were people who were killed at the hands of systemic white on black racism. And
I agree.
so to use their names on the
Okay.
platform of Black Lives Matter, I think it should be taken down. And there's this huge movement right now just in the social media because Breonna Taylor's is the one that's most close to relevance in terms of when it took place. Everybody now, there's this outcry for her family and her loved ones and how justice wasn't served. And it's like, part of me has to think, well, what about the officers that were involved in that shooting? So yes, there was a grand jury indictment for the one who recklessly fired his weapon because he was around an incident that fire took place. But there were two other officers on that scene who were executing a warrant that was signed by a judge that allowed for
Mhm.
them to be at that house. They had probable cause to be at that house. They were serving a no-knock warrant. Bullets were fired at them when they were serving that warrant and they returned fire. Justice was served in that instance,
So let me
right?
ask you a question. Let me ask you a question, Paul. Sorry to cut you off. So if the
But do you
if
agree?
the
But do you agree that
I, I,
her killing was not the result of white on black police systemic racist crime?
I cannot speak to the intention of the officers. I could never do that, obviously. But what I can speak to,
Based on the
well,
facts
yeah,
that we know, based
based
on
on
the
the
facts that we
facts
know,
that we know.
if you have a no knock warrant for
Oh,
my house right now,
okay.
and you execute that warrant, you knock down my door, and I fire at you, and you shoot back at me,
Mhm.
do you think that that's black on white crime?
Once again, I cannot tell you. You're asking me. You're asking me based on facts to infer if there was a racial motivation. I'm
Whether or
saying.
not, okay,
Oh
whether,
wait,
go ahead.
so what? Ask me the question again. Maybe I'm not hearing you correctly.
Let's say you're the
I'll do
officer.
my best to listen very carefully right now.
No. So let's say let's say, I won't even use you, but put
Okay.
yourself in the shoes of the officers who were involved in that search warrant for Breonna
Mhm.
Taylor's residence.
Yes,
You're right. We don't know whether or not they were racists. They
we
could be.
don't.
They could have KKK tattooed on their chest and we don't know it.
True.
However, the only point that I'm making is
There was a signed warrant.
there was a signed warrant by a judge.
No knock.
They had probable cause to be there, and when they
Hmm.
entered that house, a gun was fired at them, so they
Hmm.
returned fire. So simply based on that, and as an officer, you would have to make that decision. Okay, I'm being fired. One of the officers was hit. An
Yes.
officer was struck in his femoral artery and was fortunately given the treatment that he needed, and he ultimately did not die. However,
Yeah.
but all I'm saying is, you as an officer, you have to make that decision
True.
in a split second.
Hmm.
And all I'm saying is that I don't think it's beneficial to start from a place of, well, they must have been racist. and
I agree with you.
They fired because the occupants of that house were presumably black.
I agree with you. It's we should. I've said with you before. We should look at the facts and take it case by case. Unfortunately, we don't live in a society that has done that. Especially, like you're speaking to me right now, and I can confidently say to you, and I'll stick my feet in the ground and hold firm my position that with every case, it should be judged on the merit of the case. What are the facts of this case? What are the contributing factors to this case? Were the officers reckless? Was there an abuse of power? Was it racially motivated? There a host of different things could play into one case. What I'm saying is this, and if the Black Lives Matter movement is using this case and hanging its hat on this case as this is what we're going to use to run with our mission statement, then I would severely question that. I'm not even talking about them.
Do you know how Black Lives Matter started? Do you know how it started?
You tell me in a second. Let me just finish my point. Let me finish my point real quick. So I'm not even talking about that. I'm just saying for the casual observer watching the Fox News or the NBC News or MSNBC News that will not do the heavy lifting, which we talked about earlier, to actually find out the details of the case and not be racially charged. In that pool of people that are watching this, in whatever echo chambers they exist in, they will look at these things and they will filter these things through their experiences, real or perceived. And I'm saying to minimize that is missing the point. It's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I understand the facts of this situation. Where have I lost you?
No. I guess I don't want to be accused of minimizing the emotional response to something.
Okay, cool.
I guess my natural tendency, and this isn't just with regards to this, but this is kind of personal to me. My natural tendency is to be analytical, to be academic, and to view and interpret things through an intellectual lens of, okay, well, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. And that's just kind of my natural stance on things. I can also say I have never had a close person to me or even myself been victimized in that sense. So it's hard for me to emotionally connect. I'm not discounting the emotional connection. I'm not discounting that there is an emotional side to it. However, it seems like that the narrative is driven solely on the emotional fires that are being fomented by the media, not the analytical, intellectual, academic side of let's look at the facts of the case. Is it justified right now for protests to be taking place in Louisville, where last night 2 police officers were shot in the instance of Breonna Taylor, where they had cause to be where they were? And again, I am not minimizing emotion. I'm just saying, for as much weight as we want to give the emotional side, and that is what foments the rage, I think, a lot in the media side, equal weight should be given to, and nobody is saying it, the officers had a reason to be there. The officers underwent fire. One of the officers was struck by a bullet on his femoral artery, which is a deadly artery to strike. The officers returned fire, and Breonna Taylor tragically died. Those are the facts of the case. All I'm saying is that there's an equal. The facts of the case should have equal weight. I'm not dismissing the emotional side.
Which is why I asked you the question about the burden of responsibility. I'm saying it's easier for you and I to sit here and say, let's look at the facts of the case. It's not easy for a lot of people to see that, because a lot of times the facts of the case were thrown out the window and their points of views were not even brought to given the day time of day. So I'm agreeing with you. I'm saying to you that yes, the facts should matter. Facts, lives matter too, right? But I'm saying that, but to say that, and it's easy for me to say it. Look, listen, Jacob. Like right now, everything you're saying,
I agree with you.
I agree. But what I'm saying as well too is there is an emotional, historical, real reaction that people are having to what's going on right now that you are not experiencing. I am not experiencing, but they're
Right.
experiencing. So it's like okay, it's like casualties of war, right? If two countries are going at it, and okay, the leaders of this country don't agree with each other, well, then we send our planes over to that country and then we bomb their army, whatever, and there are casualties, people who suffer because of that, right? So what is happening right now in America is the casualty of oppression, and oppression begets oppression. And no one is saying don't look at the facts. I'm a proponent for the facts all day, every day. But I'm saying understand why some protests get violent is because for the longest time, for example, let me give you, I know we're going to take a little tangent here, so forgive me for changing the rules as we go along. Uh, but think about Colin Kaepernick, right? He knelt down, a very peaceful protest, on his knee. He wasn't yelling at his teammates. He knelt down. Yeah, he was kneeling down during the singing of the national anthem. We can disagree on whether or not you do it then, but it
Well,
was a very
I don't know what your position is on that. So don't even say did we disagree yet?
no. I said we can. I said we could.
Oh,
We,
okay.
we could. So we could disagree that he should have knelt for the anthem, blah blah. That's beside the point. What I'm trying to say is it was a peaceful protest, and they said no, don't protest that way. He was trying to protest something that he had facts to back up, but they said don't protest that way. He goes and protests peacefully, like Martin Luther King did. They label him as a disturber of the peace. Some people within that protest break off into violent sections, and then that whole protest is then labeled as that, right? So it's hard to get your voice through with the facts. So it's no surprise people jump on the bandwagon of emotion to get their voices heard. That's all I'm saying. I'm not excusing it, but I'm just saying it's the language of the oppressed to be emotional and to be emotionally charged. And until you and I say you and I because I'm African, right? And my wife and I have conversations about this. I'm African. My ancestors, yeah, they had the history of slavery. My great 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 grand ancestors got taken away from our land and moved over to the Western world. But I don't have the immediate, you know, I can reach out and touch my grandmother who can tell me stories about how she went to Jim Crow or whatever. I don't have that immediacy. So we have that conversation. So I don't know what the African American man or woman feels here. Just like the African American man and woman cannot come to Nigeria and tell my father, who has lived there his whole life, how he should feel about his oppression. So and people who have been oppressed don't want to hear these are the facts. They want to hear, do you see my perspective first of all? You know, do you see the wound that I have that's gaping right here? And until you address that wound, why should I listen to what you got to say about facts? That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree, but the conversation has to last longer than 3.5 seconds
I agree.
for that level of conversation to take place. You're talking about hours upon hours upon hours of a dialogue that's taking place where both people or both representations at the table are receptive to counterpoints. Again,
Mm-hmm.
you and I are doing this. You and I are doing this civilly, where I don't I the emotional element of this does not resonate with me as viscerally as it does with you. That is a fact. I can't make that to be true, right? Again, like I
Mm-hmm.
said, I did not choose to be born to the parents that I was born to the skin color that I was born to the class that I was born to, which was not upper class by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, we grew up relatively not poor, but certainly not well to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and with respect to Colin Kaepernick, I don't have any problem with what he did, taking a knee, right? I really don't. I mean, I think though what when he took that knee, the media seized on it as a polarization opportunity. You knew that the media on the right, the conservative media, was going to say, "How dare he? That's unpatriotic. That's disrespectful to our flag. That's disrespectful to every person who's served in the military ever. He hates America. He's unpatriotic." what he's doing is awful. I did not take that as what he was doing. I just took that as him. He lives in a country that we profess to be free. You have freedom of speech, you have freedom of actions, and he decided to manifest those and act out those freedoms that are bestowed upon him by saying, I'm going to kneel down for the national anthem for this. And again, I have no issue with that. I don't think I would ever be in a place where I would feel compelled to kneel for the national anthem. But I think the media looked at that and they said, oh, we can seize on this and we can make money on it. We've talked about, like, those media, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, they're businesses. They want to turn a profit. They want to turn a profit. And so the more polarizing they can be, and the more that they can say the other side sucks and the other side is terrible and the other side's opinion is crap, they're going to encourage viewership for people that disagree with the other side, and they're going to get viewership and they're going to get ratings and they're going to get money, and that's all they care about. They don't care about feeding you the facts. They just don't. They want to turn a profit.
It's not a good business model for them to do that.
That's all. It's a great business model for them because they want to make money.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not a good business model for the citizens to get information. Correct. Yep. Yeah. So,
if you don't mind, Jacob, I know you and I could talk. The reason why we're doing this podcast is because this is exactly what we talked about during church at the back room as we were getting ready to go play music on stage. But I would give both of us just some final thoughts on this, and then we can always revisit this. I can tell from all the comments coming in that this is a topic that we should probably just kind of revisit, something similar to this to revisit, because I believe this should be a healthy space for conversation, and it is.
Are you able to save those? Because we didn't have a chance to pin those comments today. Are you able to capture those comments and save them? I don't know how it works.
They are on Facebook.
Okay.
They should be on Facebook. I can do it right now real quick if you want me to. But
no, I'm not asking that because I know you have a soccer game to get to. So
thanks for putting my business out there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's cool. It's cool, man. No, it's cool. But the reason why, and there've been some great comments. By the way, everyone that's commented, thank you so much. I appreciate the lovely comments. We appreciate your points of views. I did not pin most of the comments today just for the sake of, I would much rather have those conversations. We would much rather have those conversations with you guys in person or virtually. So that way it doesn't get lost in translation when somebody else is reading them, or because we want to promote a safe space where you can share your content without, people dissecting it and chopping it up. We choose to do this, and I'll leave it at that for now. But let's just give each other some final thoughts, and I'll let you go. I'll let you go finally, not last, so that way I can speak my piece with regards to this, and then we can revisit this again another time, if it's cool with you and cool with the rest of the people who are watching right now. We're both Christian men, and when I travel and I play music all over the world, I don't force my religion down on people, but I hope through my disposition and the way I treat people that people will be provoked to jealousy and say, hey, what is it that you have that I don't have, that I can benefit from because you seem to have this very beautiful disposition? That is my goal. So isn't it amazing when our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, whenever he met someone that was in sin, whatever that sin may be, it's fascinating to me that he almost never addressed the sin first. He addressed the need first. All right? There was always a need that it was addressed first. The hungry crowd, he addressed their hunger first before he gave them the word. The adulterous woman, he addressed her need for validation before he gave her the forgiveness of her sin. Right? It's like he addressed the human need first before he then addressed the sin. He addressed their needs first before he went to the facts of the fact that they were sinners. I feel like this is my proposal. I feel like, and for everyone watching right now, if you agree with this premise, dissect it, think it out, and let me know what you think. But I feel like as a society, we should address each other's needs. Wherever we see there is hunger, let's address the hunger. Wherever we see there's pain and suffering, let's address the pain and suffering. And then after we address those needs, then we can then address the facts that surround that need. So with regards to what we're talking about right now, with the whole racially charged, emotionally charged society we live in, thank God for social media, that just adds fuel to the fire. I feel like it's okay to say these are the circumstances and this is how we should judge the circumstances. But I feel a greater responsibility and weight should be placed on the needs of the people who feel like they've been oppressed. So we can hear them, listen to them, and then after we've addressed their complaints and their needs, go into a more fact based uh, situation. I've said enough. Your turn.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I agree with you. And then I agree with everything that you just laid out. And so I would say, you brought up the fact that both of us are Christian men, and we have a firm belief and faith and foundation in the Bible. And it was two verses that I came across. It was just a couple days ago, and I knew that I didn't know specifically what we would be talking about, but I knew based on the last conversation that these two verses were going to be very apropos to the conversation, and it turns out that they are very much so even for tonight. And it's in 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 8 and 9. It says, "Finally, all of you be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble." Verse 9 says, "Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing. Because of this, you were called so that you may inherit a blessing." And so I would say, as much division and vitriol and hatred as there is that lies at the core of race-based matters and issues and conversations, we have to enter it with that mindset, right? We have to enter it with the mindset of, I'm not here to, if you slap me in the face, I'm going to slap you harder. And, if you gut me, then I'm going to gut you and your family so that you feel the pain even more than I feel it. And so that to me is the place where I just kind of want to put a cap on this tonight, because like I said, I came across it not that long ago after we had our last conversation, and it just seemed like a good place to stop.
I love it, bro. Thank you so much for being brave with me. This is not, for anyone watching right now, this is not a comfortable thing for the both of us. We definitely, at least I don't profess to be qualified to speak on the issues that I'm speaking on, but I do profess to be qualified as a child of God to, like Jacob said, speak kind. So thank you so much, Jacob, for doing this with me. I appreciate you, bro. Thank you, everyone that dropped their comments. God bless you all. And we'll let you know when we stream. We'll be streaming sometime next week around the same time. So if you find any value in the content we're putting out, please by all means follow us on our social media handles and go on YouTube, subscribe to our page, and hit the notification bell so that way you can see any and every content that has to do with the Jacob and Nelson podcast. Thank you, Jacob, and I'll see you next time.
See you, man.
All right.